Hi everyone, my name is Ewan. I'm second year in college, majoring in economics and political science. I'm a communications intern at the IOP and a contributor at the Gate, the independent undergrad publication covering politics at large, housed at IOP. Today we welcome former White House photographer Pete Souza. Mr. Souza served as the official White House photographer for President Ronald Reagan and President Barack Obama. Outside of the White House, Mr. Souza was a photographer with the Chicago Tribune's DC bureau, during which he started to cover Obama as early as in his first day as a senator. In the past 4 years, Mr. Souza turned his social media into an icon of Soren Shade. He posted archival nostalgic images from the Obama administration, alongside captions that uniquely point to the difference between the Obama and Trump administrations. This year, director Don Porter produced a documentary film titled The Way I See It, revolving around Mr. Souza's time behind the scenes alongside two presidents. The film draws from Mr. Souza's photo book, Obama: An Intimate Portrait, and explores President Obama's time in office through a photojournalist lens. Currently, Mr. Souza is a freelance photojournalist based in Madison, Wisconsin. The conversation will be moderated by IOP director David Axelrod. Welcome.
Let's see. Hey, my friend. Good to see you again.
See you, X.
I have to say that, and Ben Rhodes sort of touched on this in that wonderful film, but if I were to choose one, if you had said to me, in 4 years, someone here is going to be an iconic figure, and a universally known activist, the subject of a movie, the author of 2 best-selling books, it would not have been you.
It would not have been me.
Yeah. Are you as surprised as I am to find yourself in this position?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know when I first started, quote unquote, speaking out on Instagram that my posts would catch on, that people would actually rely on looking at them every day. So, and then, several years later, that somebody would approach me about doing a documentary film based on, my speaking out. No, I would never have imagined that.
I mean, the thing that makes it so astonishing is you are naturally a discreet person, and you have to be in the jobs that you've held. I mean, part of the job is discretion. You see lots of things, you can't share them all, and people rely on your discretion, and you're basically, you know, you're quiet. It must have been kind of an unnatural role for you to then step forward, not just at, it's one thing through your Instagram, but then on the speaking circuit and the television circuit and so on. How did you, I mean, was it a challenge for you to make that jump?
I mean, it was a challenge to get started, especially speaking, just because I hadn't really done that much public speaking. But I sort of got myself into a rhythm where I became more confident in doing it, and I could engage audiences where I knew I was connecting with them. And I sort of looked at this as I had no choice in the matter. I mean, I felt so offended by the way I felt, it's my personal opinion, that Trump was disrespecting the office of the presidency. And I felt I had no choice but to speak out. One thing that's interesting is whether I would have felt this compelled if I had been, 40 years old instead of, 60 years old, because, I kind of have ruined my photojournalism career by speaking out. And, I might have calculated differently if I had been a younger man. I don't know.
Do you, now you're out of the shade business. You're, you've accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, which was your contrast created ferment in this campaign. What do you what do you do after that? A retired shade man.
Yeah, well, I don't, the way it's going, I'm probably not going to be retired until next January 20th. So I think I still have a little bit of work to do in the next couple of months.
Got a few more photos in your drawer, do you?
Oh,
Some
for
transition
sure.
photos.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of made a somewhat of a shade post today. But after that, after January 20th, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm sort of hamstrung by COVID-19 in that I don't feel that I can get out there and earnestly start a photo project in the midst of COVID-19. Just given my age group and a little bit of a underlying health condition. So that gives me 6 or 8 months to really think about what I want to do next.
Well, let's talk about how it all started. There was some biographical material in the film, and you talked about being drawn to photography in college, and you gave some sense of it. But what specifically was it that grabbed you and said, "Man, this is what I want to do"?
It was less about journalism and less about photojournalism than it was about the magic of photography. Where you were in control of the picture from start to finish. You created the image through the viewfinder, then you go into the darkroom, you develop your film, and then you make your print in the darkroom, and you see that image appear as you're rotating your tray of Dectal developer. This is going back in
Yes.
the analog days.
I understand
And it was
about, even if a lot of other people on this Zoom don't.
But it was like that magic. It was magic to me. That's what really struck me more than anything.
You talk about finding that that photo in your viewfinder. It always struck me, even when we were working together, you always talked about making a picture, not taking a picture, but making a picture. And that may seem like a distinction without a difference, but I actually think there is a difference, because you didn't see your job simply as capturing what happened, but as capturing composing it in such a way that it told a story.
That's it. That's it exactly. It's the combination of the way you framed it through that viewfinder, the way you composed it, and then trying to anticipate the moment, so you're clicking the shutter at just the right time. And I think the making verb comes really from Ansel Adams, who ironically made pictures in a completely different way, because it involved landscapes and pretty pictures, and and for him, sort of manipulating that image a little bit in the darkroom, and yet it really makes sense in terms of photojournalism too, that you're really creating that image in the viewfinder.
Yeah, I mean, where you position yourself, what is in the foreground, what is in the background. I mean, that is so clear in your photos. There was one that struck me in the film where you were shooting the president with a group of young people. I think they were African-American kids.
Yeah.
You shot it from behind the Martin Luther King bust in the office. And it was a subtle thing, but it gave such power to it. Let me ask you about journalism, though, and how your experience in journalism helped form you and prepare you for what was to come. And part of it was here in Chicago. You worked at the Chicago Sun-Times for a while. I think when I was at the Tribune, you may have been taking photos for the Sun-Times. First of all, tell me about how Chicago influenced you, but tell me about what you learned about your craft as a journalist.
Yeah, that was a great experience working at the Sun-Times. You have to take into consideration that I went from a 6,000 circulation daily newspaper where I was the only photographer, And then suddenly I was at the Sun-Times, which I think had a circulation of, I don't know, 500,000 or 600,000. And we had, you know, more than 20 staff photographers, and I was in a big city all of a sudden. And, you know, and there was lots of stuff going on, not just news and politics and sports and, you know, and so I was exposed to all these new broad subjects that I hadn't been when I worked for a small daily paper in Kansas. And I just relished it. I mean, you know, the only reason I ever left the Sun-Times was because someone I knew had become photo editor at the Reagan White House and just called me out of the blue one day. You know, I often think, as you know, you probably do when you make decisions in your life, what if I had not taken that call or gotten that call? You know, I might still be at the Sun-Times or the Tribune.
Yeah.
And, you know, as a newspaper photographer, that's how much I loved it. I just loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I always say I went to the University of Chicago and was educated in the newsroom of the Chicago Tribune because you were exposed to so much there. And what did it teach you about the craft? Because you must have covered all kinds of human drama and all manner of thing as a Sun-Times photographer. What did you learn? And there must have been something, because obviously your friend saw something in you to bring you to the Reagan White House.
You know, I think I just further honed my craft. I mean, you know, the one thing that really sticks in my mind about the Sun-Times was I did this project on the homeless and was out in the streets with this reporter, Dirk Johnson, and we did several stories and illustrated with my photographs, and it got a lot of attention. And I remember the very first mayoral debate of that season was with Jane Byrne, and I can't remember who she was running against.
Well, if it was in 1983, it would have been Harold Washington and Rich Daley.
Well, it was 1980. Well, maybe that's what it was. I can't even remember.
It could have been 79, and she could have been running against Michael Bolandic too.
No, it wasn't that race. But anyway, it was at the first debate. The first question from the moderator was about, what are you going to do about the homeless in Chicago? And I was like, I don't think it was coincidence that was the first question. I think it had directly to do with the stories and photographs that we had done for the Sun-Times. And that made sort of a lasting impression with me that, you know, photographs, maybe they're not going to change things, but they can make people aware. Photojournalism can.
Yeah, well, and they can change things. I mean, think of the photos that were taken in Vietnam, for example.
Yeah.
And how they impacted on people's views of that war. So you went off to the White House. You were a young man. You didn't know Ronald Reagan. Talk about that experience. And specifically, Reagan himself was a unique figure in his own right. He had been an actor before he became a politician. Did that make him easier or harder to work with? Because he obviously he too understood what a scene looked like and had some instinct for that.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, sir, I got there in the middle of his first term. So he had been used to his chief photographer, Michael Evans, you know, being around and snapping pictures. And but it was much different than, you know, the White House you experienced, where the staff was much more guarded of him in terms of letting, you know, me or one of my colleagues get in there for the, you know, a lot of the behind the scenes moments. They were very protective of his image, which I think in many ways was, you know, it was unfortunate. I did manage especially in the second term, to be able to get in there and get better access and try to reveal what he was like as a human being. the presence of the camera really didn't bother him. I didn't think. And, and I think I was able to get in there, not just for some like sort of fleeting moments, but also, during the Iran-Contra scandal, to try to show the angst that was pervasive throughout the White House during that political scandal, which, my guess is your students have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, there was a scandal in the Reagan administration that involved the president and his senior aides, and it was quite a burdensome time for him. There was that great scene in the film where you're shooting them on the ranch, I guess, and he was sort of directing a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
Where he wanted what
and
kind of.
And I think that was one of those things where it didn't happen that often, never happened in the Obama administration. And it didn't happen that often in the Reagan administration. But it was, he would go up to the ranch every summer for 3 or 4 weeks and the press would never see him. And like, halfway through the vacation, they would get angst. Is he okay? What's going on? And so they would sort of dispatch me to the ranch to get a photo that we could release to the press.
Well-being check, huh?
Yeah. But it's pretty, I had actually never seen that video until it appeared in the film. So it was quite amusing to me.
Yeah. Michael Deaver, who was his sort of impresario when it came to politics, told me that he once charted out a day for Reagan when he was governor, when Tom Brokaw was coming up from Los Angeles to do a television feature on Reagan. And Deaver plotted out a day, and he said at noon we're going to go down to the plaza. You're going to throw your coat over your shoulder, and you're going to talk to people eating lunch. Reagan said the whole day's fine except for that, and he said why? And Reagan said because I never take my coat off.
Yeah.
And if I do, he said the camera will read it. People will know it's not me.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really exceptional.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sense of self-awareness. So. Talk about your relationship with Barack Obama and how that relationship grew. And did the growth in your relationship affect the pictures that you took? Did that evolve in any way? Did you become more protective of him? Did you, because you became quite a good friend.
Yeah, well, I met him in January 2005. Right after you helped him get elected to the Senate. And I had been pestering Robert Gibbs to give me access because we wanted this is when I was with the Tribune. We wanted to kind of document his first year in the Senate. And I actually met him at his hotel the day that he was sworn in as senator for the first time. And I introduced myself to him and he was just like, yeah, great to have you along, as if the last 3 weeks of me pestering Gibbs meant nothing, And, so those 2 years mostly that I documented him in the Senate, it was very much a professional relationship. But, we're kind of more, he's a little bit older than me. I'm a little bit older than him, but we're kind of from the same generation. So there was a connection, I think, because of that. And you discussed the way I work, which is, just being really quiet and not trying to interfere. And I think he appreciated the way I went about my business and not like being a nuisance, but still being able to make pictures. And, fast forward to the White House. The unique position that I had was I was involved in all these different compartments of his life. So when he was in the Situation Room, with a national security team, I was in there with him. When he was discussing the Affordable Care Act with his team and his political advisors like yourself, I was in there for that. But I was also there when he and the family were opening Christmas gifts every Christmas. And so I kind of became sort of like an extended member of the family. but it's a strange relationship to be in, because you're sort of a friend, but at the same time, you're the historian with the camera in the room. Um, and so you have to be true to history and try to document these moments as they unfold. And yet then you're on Air Force One and you're playing cards with him, you know. So it's sort of like it was just an odd relationship in some ways, I guess.
Yeah. And did it evolve? Does it affect in any way how you saw him, how you pictured him?
I don't think so, because I think that he understood, you know, the value of having somebody document his presidency. And I'll never forget, you know, we did this book for the staff after the Affordable Care Act was passed.
Yeah.
It was just a personal book. We put it together, and I was showing him an early copy of it, you know, the way I'd put it together, and he was like, "Where are the protesters? I want to see the people that were like yelling at me, you know, about healthcare." And I was like, "Oh, you." You know, that's so. I just that said a lot to me, that he really wanted me to document what truly happened.
I remember after the miserable debate we had in Denver in 2012, the first debate, and you told me, like, I was aware that it was a miserable debate. I got beaten up by the media right after. And I ran into you and you told me that he had come off the stage and he told you, well, I think that went pretty well, which is often what happens with people. They have no idea when they're on the stage what's going on. And you said I thought to myself, uh-oh. Did he ask your opinion on these things? Did you share your opinions on these things?
You know, very rarely. It's funny that you bring that up. If you remember, I can't remember if you were there. The next day, we had a big rally.
Yes.
Was that in Colorado, maybe?
Yes, it was.
And he was despondent by then. I think he had taken in what everybody had told him and realized he had, you know, messed up. And I remember we were in there was like a little tent before he went out on stage, and I could see he was really despondent. It's kind of like the one time I went up to him and I put my hand on his shoulder, and I just said to him, I said, "Sir, people just want to see that you're fighting for them. That's it. Go out there and fight for them." You know, and that was very unusual for me to do that. But I sort of felt I was in a position that I could, and that I was somewhat of an outsider. I wasn't his political advisor. I wasn't Valerie Jarrett. And I could say something like that to him in that moment. But that was probably I probably only did that one other time.
Yeah.
I just felt it was something that I should and could say.
Well, let me say, his political advisors applaud your intervention there. It was important. He actually he ended up giving kind of a rip-roaring speech there.
He did. Yeah.
I remember getting texts from reporters saying, where was that guy last night?
Yeah.
So that was important. You know, I watched the film and with Susan, my wife, who you know, and we both had this feeling of pride, having worked in that White House, you know, revered the experience. Obviously, I have deep affection for him and respect for him. But the question comes now, 4 years later, was that a unique moment? Can that moment be recaptured? Did you have that same? I mean, it was almost a sense of a loss about the sort of innocence and idealism and respect that was that was suffused the pictures that you took and the feelings that we had. How did you experience that as well?
I did. I mean, I experienced that the night of the election in 2016, because I was sort of like, I just couldn't believe what had just happened. And over those last 2 months before we left, I was just trying to rack my brain around how could this have happened? How did we go from Barack Obama to Donald Trump? I mean, I still don't understand it. And it just shows you. I mean, I've started reading his book. I'm just on, like, I don't know, 4th or 5th chapter. And then watching the 60 Minutes interview last night and the CBS morning show interview. And it's sort of, it made me think the same thing again. Like, okay, how did we go from that guy to where we are now? I mean, it's hard for me to comprehend in so many ways. It does show you, we are a divided country, but at the same time, like, it would have been easier for me to accept if, a John McCain or a John Kasich or a Jeb Bush or somebody who, still, I may disagree with them, but they still would respect the office and, are decent human beings. I just don't understand how he went to this, con man.
Before we go to questions, say a word about Joe Biden. You must have taken many, many photos with him in them, and you had a chance to observe him. What insights do you have about him?
I mean, Joe Biden is one of the most compassionate and empathetic human beings that I know. And I really mean that. I tell people that every meeting that he was ever in with Barack Obama, I was also in. So I got to see him, observe him. And, he had a tendency sometimes to talk too much, which he acknowledges. But at the same time, he always came at almost every discussion he ever had from the point of view of somebody that grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And I'm sure you felt the same way.
Yeah.
But he, as telling you before we got started, my mom died about 3 weeks ago, and one of the first phone calls I got was from Joe Biden, which I think tells you so much about him, that in the midst of his campaign, he took the time to call me out of the blue. No staff had alerted me ahead of time. I got this call and I answered the phone and it was him. And he had met my mom and had a little bit of a connection with her. And I just felt that just shows you what kind of a human being he is.
Let's take some questions. And the first one is coming from Yang, a graduate student in sociology.
Oh, can you see
There
me?
you go. You're on, man.
Sure, great. Thank you for your conversation. So I have a question about imagery and its effect. So imagery often has a life of its own when its elements are edited for targeted recipients. So to what extent do you think imagery of presidents could play in cultivating emotional attachment or even emotional imagination among the recipients? More specifically, between manufacturing a cult of personality and constructing a role model, what lessons could be drawn from these two very different effects of documenting presidency?
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to answer that question. I will say this is one of the things when the White House press office came to me and said, we want to make behind the scenes pictures, we want to post those online on a Flickr, a photo stream. One of the things that I said to him was, I want to curate the photographs. I want to choose which photographs are going to go online, because I didn't want somebody going through all my pictures from a press point of view saying, oh, this one makes him look good, this one makes him look good. My attitude was, let's be authentic. Let's show what's really going on. If he's agonizing over the financial crisis, we need to show that. But it, sort of beyond that, I don't feel that I'm in the best position to answer that question because I'm biased.
Thank you. Vava from the class of 24.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. My question is, did you ever consciously choose not to publish a photo of the president as it would paint him in a bad light? What I mean is, for example, during World War II, many journalists chose not to publish photos of President Roosevelt showing his disability, as they believed that during a time of crisis like wartime, the nation needs to believe that the president is strong, and showing his disability would be, well, something bad. So did you ever face such a dilemma?
I don't think so. Matter of fact, I had just mentioned the photographs of him agonizing over the financial crisis. We, posted on Flickr many pictures like that, and they ended up being used by the Republicans in attack ads in 2 years later, like totally out of context. So, those are the things that happen. But I tried to be as authentic as possible. I'm trying to think. The only time we wouldn't necessarily publish something was if the press office had an objection for one reason or another. It may be something like, and one thing that comes to mind is like, I'd have a picture of him with a certain congressman, and they were not happy with that congressman or something like that. And they're like, oh, well, let's hold that picture back. But I will, just so that everybody understands, every single picture that I ever made, all 1.9 million photographs, are now at the National Archives. And there's a process over a number of years where every single picture eventually becomes public. So I think people will be able to, judge how I chose images and whether I did a good job or not. I think I did.
Thank you. Thank you. Pete, let me just ask a follow-up, and it's sensitive, but he's written and talked about it, but it's well known that he fought a battle with smoking that he overcame. Was that something that you just stayed away from?
Yeah, I mean, he snuck cigarettes, and he snuck them where sort of like yeah, it snuck him away from me. I mean, I didn't go to the bathroom with him, so it wasn't like I was with him every second of the day. Yeah. I do remember when I was photographing him at the for the Tribune, and I was working with Jeff Zeleny on this story, that we were getting word that he was still smoking, and I was like, okay, if I see him, I'm going to photograph it, Yeah. But and I will say that at the White House, it was early in 2010 where he just stopped cold turkey.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing.
Was an amazing thing.
We spoke with him about it, and he told us as soon as the Affordable Care Act is passed, I will stop. And he did.
He did. It's like, it's astounding to me that, somebody who had this habit just stopped cold turkey.
Yeah. Yeah. It gave him license to then start writing Gibbs and me about losing weight. So I was not happy about that. But anyway, moving on, we have a question from Chloe, who's a student at the lab school. Chloe.
Hi, my name is Chloe. I go to the high school, and as an aspiring photojournalist, I was just wondering, what is one of the hardest parts of either keeping a confidentiality type thing with working at the White House, or what is one of the hardest things that you've had to do as a photojournalist in general, not just as the White House photographer?
Pete, did you hear that question? Because you disappeared for a minute. Uh-oh. Pete, are you back?
Can you
hear
me?
Are you there, Pete?
I'm here.
Okay, did you hear the question?
I did not.
Chloe,
Sorry.
You want to repeat it?
Sure. My name's Chloe. I go to the high school at Lab. And my question is, as an aspiring photojournalist, first of all, I really admire you and your work. My father and I watched the documentary and just thought it was amazing. And I was just wondering, as a photojournalist, what is one of the hardest things you've had to do, not just as the White House photographer, just in general?
I think probably the hardest thing I ever had to do was I covered the beginning of the Afghan war when I was with the Tribune, and this was before there was a single U.S. troop on the ground. So it was I was sort of not embedded, but I was tagging along with the forces in Afghanistan that were fighting the Taliban while the U.S. air campaign was going on. And so I think that was the hardest thing I ever did in terms of like actually getting into the country and then being there when, you know, these bombs were being dropped and there were sniper bullets and RPGs and things like that. So I think that was probably the hardest thing I ever had to do as a photojournalist.
What advice, Pete, do you have for Chloe and others who want to make a career in photojournalism?
I mean, it's hard right now because it used to be when I was getting started out, the path forward was working for a newspaper, getting a staff job at a newspaper, and those jobs are just far and few between now. I love newspapers. If you are able to get a job at a newspaper, I think it's really rewarding in so many ways. But I think it's harder and harder to do. And I think you end up, if you want to be a photojournalist, you end up having to be a freelancer where you're based where you're based and you're mostly doing work in that town or city. And in order to survive, that is to pay the bills, I think you have to learn to branch out, to not just do photojournalism, but also if you have to do a few weddings or a few commercial assignments just to pay the bills. I would think about thinking about it as a business, not just as being a photojournalist.
What you say you got 6 months to think about what you want to do next. You have a platform now that is your platform. You're not the sort of behind the scenes White House photographer. You're not a staff photographer for a newspaper. You're a personage in your own right. Does that encourage you to go and try and find things where you can shine a bright light in dark corners and
absolutely
bring attention to it? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you think about the number of people that I reach on Instagram. I've worked for 4 newspapers in my career, and their combined circulation is less than a third of what the number of followers I have on Instagram. And sometimes I forget that, where I have to actually be careful about not necessarily the photographs that I post. And I'm talking about new photographs. I covered a few of the protests here in Madison, and what I write matters. And I've got to be real careful that I'm being cognizant of the words that I put down in my posts. But certainly I do have a platform, and I'm gonna utilize it.
I should note for everybody that you also took some of the greatest performance photos of Bruce Springsteen that I've ever seen, one of which is still a screensaver for me. So there's always that, you can.
There's always that.
If there's tours again, you can always go. Got a question from Maddie, which is probably a good way to sort of put a button on all of this. Maddie, there you are.
Hi there. My question is, from your experience working so closely with President Obama, What was lost during the Trump years?
Gosh, that's like a long list. Decency, fact, honesty, being ethical, being lawful, interacting with people. Have you ever seen him hug anybody? Have you ever seen him console people after national tragedy? It is astounding how much we've lost. And I'm just talking about on a human level, not on a policy level. And I think that's what bothers me the most. I'm trying to wrap my head around how 70 million people still voted for him. Despite the kind of person that he is. And I just don't understand it. So, I think that you've already seen how we're going to get some of that back with President-elect Biden, and on a human level. That is, the compassion, the empathy, the decency, the honesty, being ethical, being moral, and it's those things that is what we've lost the most, I think.
I will say that you don't have to drive very far from Madison to find some of those 70 million.
No, you don't. You don't.
Pretty well in Wisconsin. And I think, I would just say it behooves us all to try and figure that out.
Absolutely.
The other thing, just an answer to Maddie's question, the thing I think, Pete, that you always captured so well is that I think everyone who walked in the White House when I worked there, and I think that most of my Republican counterparts would say this, never lost a sense of awe, never lost that sense of incredible good fortune to be in this historic place and to be a part of something so extraordinary and so important. And everyone thought of it as a trust that we were handed, that you were to handle with great care and use to the fullest to do the best you could for the country. That is the story that is told in your photos. And I believe that is the story that presidents, Republican and Democrat, can identify with. I was struck, I asked you before about the transition, and you must have started taking photos during when did you actually start photographing President Obama at the beginning? Was it before he took the oath of office, or was it just when he took the oath of office?
Yeah, no, it was about January 5th or 6th, so it wasn't like during the transition period when he was hiring people, although he still had a few more hires to make, but it was leading up to the inauguration, those 2
What I
weeks.
was going to get to was, did you capture any of the interaction between him and President Bush?
Oh, yeah.
And what was that?
Yeah. Well, funny thing was the first day I photographed that you and Gibbs were there was the day we went, not right after the election, but before, a couple of weeks before the inauguration, when we went to the White House, when the former presidents were all going to have lunch together. That was actually my first day on the job. And you remember that we went to the White House, and
I still have that photo on my wall.
Yeah, the Bushes were there, President Clinton, President Carter.
Yes.
And that was sort of that was my first day. And I remember the thing I remember is if you were in the van with me, because remember
Yes,
our
I
van,
remember.
we got separated from our little motorcade, and we ended up outside the gates, and we couldn't get in for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to miss this, you know. But thanks to the Bush people, we did get in, and I was able to document the meeting with the 5 presidents.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important image because that's what transitions are supposed to look like.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they were all really generous. Well, let me say this as we go out. You're a very gifted photographer. Everybody knows that now, but it's not just because you know where to position yourself, and it's not just because you know when to take the shot. It's because you bring a great humanity to it, and you recognize scenes that mean something and have power. And that is a great gift. And it says a lot about you, not just as a photographer, but as a person. And I think people are now, despite yourself, people are now beginning to know you as a person, as we did. And, you know, you deserve all the accolades that you get. And I look forward to seeing what you do with all that talent and all that passion in the years to come. But it's going to make the world a little bit better. I know that. So thank you, brother, for your time now, for everything you've done, and for shedding a little light in the world.
Well, Ax, thanks. I appreciate it, and it was a pleasure to join you and the students very much.
All right. Be well.
Okay, man.
See ya.
Take care.